88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends, and I am joined by somebody else that is not me here on the show.
Hi, I am Walter.
You are Walter. Wonderful introduction, as always, Walter. Great to have you back.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while for both you and I to be on the show together, and also for just the show being on in general. I think it's been about 2 weeks since I even hosted it, either on my own or with a co-host. So I'm glad to be back. I didn't want to miss last week. I set the goal for myself. I'm not going to miss this week of What to Watch Weekends, and this was last week, right? Mm-hmm. So I set that goal for myself. I set that absolute attainable goal, and then I got sick on Friday.
No.
So that happened, but I'm no longer sick, thankfully. Just in time for finals, and we're back on for our final episode of What to Watch Weekends for winter quarter. And what a way to round out winter quarter it's going to be, because in order to close it out, I figured it would be a really good idea to talk about a iconic person in the film industry. I think, at least that was my line of logic. I figured might as well go with something everybody has heard of. Let me ask you, Walter, for our subject today, it requires a brief prelude. Have you heard of a little movie known as Citizen Kane before?
I have.
You have?
Yes.
Do you think a lot of people have heard of a movie called Citizen Kane?
I mean, it's a pretty famous movie.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, it is quite the famous movie indeed. For those of you who don't know, Citizen Kane is often called the best movie of all time. So it is pretty famous for that reason.
Yeah.
But it is also quite famous for being the first and probably biggest cinematic outing by the director, lead actor, and co-writer of the movie, that being Orson Welles. And I figured it'd be a really good idea to talk about specifically Citizen Kane, a couple other movies by him, and then another special thing done by Orson Welles. We're basically going to unpack Orson Welles tonight. He's in the trunk, and he's now going to be unpacked from the trunk. I don't know what that analogy is supposed to entail, but buy Orson Welles travel gear. No, that's the joke. I don't know where I was going with it, but I was going somewhere with it. I'm going to start at the actual good place to start, because for our first movie or first subject on the watch list tonight, we are going to be talking about Citizen Kane, because it's the thing that everybody knows about Orson Welles. If you ask anybody, do you know who Orson Welles is? They might say no. If you ask them, have you heard of Citizen Kane? They might say yes. I remember in high school, one person who I was talking to, who was like a childhood friend of mine, and we were like reconnecting in high school, he was saying to me, oh yeah, I really like movies by Quentin Tarantino. I've also always wanted to watch this one movie in black and white that's really famous and well known. And I went, is it Citizen Kane? And he goes, oh yeah, that one. So it's got that reputation going for it. I should mention, Citizen Kane is from 1941 and is available to rent from places such as Google Play, Amazon, Fandango at Home, and Apple TV. Now that is out of the way, let me ask you, you've seen Citizen Kane before.
Yeah.
Has it been a while? Or?
It's been a number of years.
Okay. I've rewatched it recently, but I first watched it a couple of years ago as well. Where should we start here? I'll just ask you. You told me about how you kind of came into contact with the movie. So how about we go with yours first?
Okay. In high school, I took this class called American History Through Film. And it was a lot of, I forget, was it? Throughout the school year, I had to watch a certain number of films from the, what was it called? The American Film Institute Top 100 Films list.
Yeah, the AFI.
AFI list.
Yes,
and
that one.
Throughout the school year, I had to watch a number of films, like one every 2-3 weeks.
Right.
And write a little report about it.
One every 2 to 3 weeks is that seems like a pretty easy assignment considering there's 100 movies on that list.
Yeah.
So you got a lot to pick from.
So one of the films I watched was Citizen Kane.
Right.
Mainly because it was like one of the top like 4.
Yeah, I
But-
mean, I'll pull up the list while you're talking
Yeah.
here.
Anyways, where to start with this?
Just start and
Yeah.
we'll work our way back around.
So, I remember it was one of the first like feature length black and white films
Right.
I watched.
You watched.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was probably, I don't know, probably 16, 17 at the time when I first saw it.
Right.
I didn't get it at first.
That is fair.
So I didn't really get it until like a couple of weeks later. And
Right.
I really like kind of felt, I don't know, should we talk like a plot summary?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I feel
that is a good
yeah.
point. I'm a bit slow today. We're a bit rusty.
Yeah,
we're
fair.
just getting back into the saddle, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for your patience, anybody who is listening in. The plot summary for Citizen Kane is it follows Thompson, a news reporter of some sort, as he is tasked with going around and interviewing people from the life of newspaper tycoon Charles Foster Kane, who has died extremely recently. Thompson is basically going around and interviewing different people, all with one goal in mind: figure out what Kane's last word meant. And his last word was rosebud. He's essentially going around and asking, hey, do you know what Kane meant by rosebud? And spoilers, for those of you who haven't seen this 84-year-old movie at this point. It's literally 84 years old. This is ridiculous. If you don't know what happens, essentially, he doesn't ever figure out what rosebud means from interviewing people. And it is only ever revealed to the audience what rosebud means.
Yeah.
And it's at the very end where they throw Charles Foster Kane's childhood sled into a furnace, and it's named Rosebud. I believe it's the name of the company that made the sled, or it was just called Rosebud. But that's what Kane was saying.
That's what was written on the sled itself.
Yes. And that's the reason that he's holding the snow globe right when he says Rosebud and then drops it and dies. Like that. It's symbolic, you see, because it's a sled that he used when he was a kid in the snow, and he has a snow globe. There's kind of that connection there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the basic plot of it. So
Okay.
I should also mention I looked up the American Film Institute list. Citizen Kane is at the top of that list. It's number 1.
Okay.
Which is crazy to me, but we'll get into whether or not it's overrated a little bit later. How about you continue with your story here?
So I wrote for this class every 2-3 weeks. I had to write a report watching a movie from that list, Citizen Kane being one. And I wrote this movie on how powerful media is in America, and especially it was about Kane being a newspaper tycoon.
Yeah.
And I wrote about how powerful being able to make the news is, right?
Oh yeah.
And how that equates pretty well to the current day. And
Sure.
how the film still holds up, and how it if it came out, relative to today, instead of newspapers making it about I guess TV news or
let's say he makes the CNN Twitter account and I think it's not really about the medium of the news. The more so significance of Citizen Kane obviously comes from I think the best way to describe it is, like all good movies that have kind of it's about a newspaper tycoon, but it's not about him becoming a newspaper tycoon, and it's not about the news business. It's about Kane, the person who is a newspaper tycoon, and how he uses his power as a figurehead rather than how he communicates and how that relates to modern day, because we don't you really use newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
It's essentially the same as how a lot of movies that kind of have a specific subject matter are usually about something different that is more related to people. The best example I can think of is, it's off the top of my head, which is why it feels kind of out there, but 8 Mile with Eminem in it. It's not about Eminem being a rapper. It is about his struggles and how rap was influenced by that, or his rap was influenced by that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's at its core is about his struggles as a rapper. Again, very strange example, but it's the only immediate thing I can think of where here's our basic pop culture focused thing, this sort of medium, this sort of way that we communicate with each other, which would be rap or newspaper or social media. But it's actually about something related to the human condition, right? Which is a kind of a simple way of realizing movies don't have to be about something outdated for them to remain timeless.
Okay, right. And about that, I said earlier, I didn't get it at first because I remember seeing the ending and he's like, oh, Rosebud. And then like literally the last like 2 minutes of the film, they show him throwing the sled that says Rosebud into the furnace. And I remember being like, that's it? Being kind of disappointed.
Yeah, it is.
Just being like, man, what? If you take it literally, it sounds really stupid. But if you take it figuratively, what that means to him, because I don't remember. Was it implied that he like grew up like poor or something?
So the way it worked is when he was a kid, specifically when he was playing with the sled, I believe he was adopted by the bank.
That was
because of his familial connections. I think it was either like they needed money to pay off the mortgage, even though they had a really good inheritance, or it was because of something in the will. It wasn't really made clear, but the point is that he was alienated from his birth parents at a very young age and raised by bank executives for his formative years, especially as a teenager. And so back when he was a small child, he was playing with the sled, and on that exact day is when he's taken away from his parents. And it's kind of the symbolic idea of, okay, now that he's dead, that memory kind of dies with him, but also him remembering that is him grasping on as that of wanting to be not the person he is today anymore. But unfortunately having that realization as he's about to die.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. At least that's the basic understanding of it. Of course, that's very shallow and kind of off the top of the head, but it works better than just saying, oh, they threw away the sled and it had Rosebud on it. That's the message there. Rosebud is the sled. There we go. And as long as you give some interpretation to it, it's gonna give you more meaning than it's just on the sled.
It's the sled.
It's the sled. Yeah. It feels like kind of the perfect way for annoying people to go, there is no deeper meaning to Citizen Kane. It was just the sled. It's like, no, there is a deeper meaning to it. But again, it's not like you get it on the first watch.
Yeah.
I will admit that I had the same problem you did, which is on the first viewing, I didn't really get it either. You don't really get Citizen Kane on the first go around, which I suppose the juxtaposition of bringing up annoying people criticizing Citizen Kane, not getting it on the first watch go around, and just the overall way you can kind of break it down is, I want to arrive to the point. Let me ask you something. You've seen it at least once, sure. And if you haven't seen it again, that's totally fine. But I think you could at least make a kind of judgment. Do you think Citizen Kane is overrated? It's okay if you do.
I can say no.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, maybe it is just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you my take, and then we can kind of break it down.
Yeah.
Right. The way I look at Citizen Kane is not really pertaining to the movie itself, more so pertaining to how I look at movies. And I won't get too deep or philosophical. So here's my main point. I'll keep it very simple. In my opinion, there is no greatest movie of all time. There are too many movies in existence to give one of them the ultimate title of best out of all of them, right? Because maybe we will make a movie at some point in the future that will be the best of all time. We may not because of the way that modern Hollywood operates, but that being aside, the cynical side, either way, I also think Citizen Kane happened a bit too early into the art of cinema to be considered the best of all time because it was 41, right? I mean, I believe it was around the 20s. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to spitball here and say that it was around the 20s that like film started to take off and be a bigger deal than it was, right?
Right.
So that was like silent films, right? So 20s were the silent films, and then we get into the 30s. There's some sound pictures, but the 40s were the big time for sound movies, right? So we had things like Wizard of Oz. Sorry, I just realized there was like a weird buzzing in the headphones. Are you hearing that too?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not just me. I'm glad. I'm sorry for the distraction. I just started hearing that. I'm like, what on earth is that?
I didn't do it.
You didn't do it? Are you sure?
No.
Oh, no. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
No, oopsie daisies.
Okay.
It's fine.
Whatever.
I will at least admit, I think that Citizen Kane, again, happened way too early into the history of cinema as an art form for it to be called number one, right?
Right.
I think a lot of other movies kind of fall into the candidacy. Just off the top of my head, things like The Godfather came out, things like Shawshank Redemption. I mean, Godfather's from the 70s and Shawshank's from the 90s, right?
Right.
Those are very distinct eras away from the 40s. We've got like kind of almost about 20 years separating all three of those movies. And I would still say all three of them are in the contending lineup for best of all time. And half of that is because I remember from that AFI list that Godfather is number 2. Casablanca also is on that list as number 3, but we've also got things like Singing in the Rain, Gone with the Wind, Lawrence of Arabia, Schindler's List, Vertigo, Wizard.
Yeah.
We're not talking about Vertigo. Things like Star Wars, you know, the original Psycho, The Graduate. I'm just reading off the AFI 100 Years, 100 Movies list now at this point. But the point is that a lot of these movies are definitely in the contender for number 1 spot. And giving it to one of them feels so disingenuous to me. It feels like, do we have to decide on which one is the best of all time? Could we kind of just we can kind of let people individually choose which one they think is the best, is the way I look at it. Because of that, I think Citizen Kane is a little overrated, right?
Right.
From the perspective of, I don't think it's the number 1 best of all time. Partially because of the whole, it happened too early, but I will also say there was one weird detail I noticed on a rewatch. Let me describe something funny to you, Walter.
Okay.
Let me tell you that the best movie of all time has a couple moments in the movie where a character is talking and you see their lips audibly moving. And what they're saying does not line up to the dialogue that you hear. Mm-hmm. Some of the dialogue is kind of out of sync. I get it was early into the process of making sound pictures, but at the same time, if we're going to call it the best of all time, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting something that doesn't break my my ability to remain immersed in a movie. That breaks it pretty significantly, and I feel like they could have fixed it. Maybe it was kind of a hiccup, but at the same time, I think that kind of it was just a weird experience of going, well, I'm not expecting perfection, but it happens like 3 times, and one of them it's so blatantly obviously happening that it really distracted me, like severely.
Yeah.
And when it came down to like, it's like the first time, okay, I can excuse it. Second time, third time around, it's like, okay, I've noticed it now. Even though it'll never happen again in the movie, I've noticed it now. That is annoying to me. Frustrating in a way.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, nitpick, yes. But significant nitpick, yes. I think that's all I really have to say about Citizen Kane, honestly. I mean, if people want to say that, oh, it's overrated, I would say you should probably provide a reason. And let me ask you, from your personal perspective, Walter, you can tell me if I didn't, but did I provide a good enough reason for it?
I think you did, yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've got that off the list. we should probably go to break because, again, we're kind of rusty and I'm thirsty. So we will be right back after some music and some underwriters or some advertisements, whatever they're called. We'll be back. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends, and I'm joined here by Walter. Hello, Walter.
Hello.
Hello. So, before the break, we were talking about Citizen Kane, and after we went to break, just to kind of close out Citizen Kane, you told me something interesting, Walter.
There was a Simpsons episode parroting Citizen Kane, but instead of it being Kane, it was Mr. Burns.
Yeah.
I just thought that was really funny.
Oh, yeah. And I cracked up when you told me that because that is pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's a decent enough concept. And I'm not really surprised that The Simpsons did it. But for some reason, I was thinking that they were like lazy writers and would have just had Homer be Citizen Kane.
No.
Having it be Mr. Burns makes a lot of sense. But so we talked about Citizen Kane, the basics of how, it's not the best movie of all time and all that good jazz, as they say. I don't know where the phrase jazz comes from. I don't mean the idea of jazz the music, whatever. All that jazz as like the abstract noun rather than the musical style. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Do you know where that phrase is coming from?
I do not.
Okay. Well, we are not going to figure it out just by sitting here asking ourselves. I'm not going to look it up, though. Anyways, so we've talked about Citizen Kane, but there is a movie that I talked about on Wednesday. There were two other movies that I talked about that were by Orson Welles on Wednesday. Normally, I'd talk about both of them here, but frankly, it's finals week, and my brain is running on fumes just a little bit. So we're only going to talk about one of the ones that I talked about on Wednesday, actually because it's most appropriate for finals week, and that is The Trial from 1962. Which is available to watch now on Tubi. Have you heard of The Trial?
I have not. Okay. I haven't heard of it, and well, that means I haven't seen it.
Yeah, yeah. Can you imagine? Imagine the process of like, okay, this is super sci-fi now, and I kind of want to write a book about somebody inventing this technology where you can basically make people remember this media that they experience. Like there's a movie out there, right? Mm-hmm. Let's call it, I don't know, The End of Times, right? So this movie, The End of Times, comes out. This is all in a hypothetical book. This is such a tangent, but I've just come up with a crazy idea and I have to share it somewhere. So I'm going to share it right here, right now. So follow me, Walter. There is a movie that comes out called The End of Time. Yes?
Yeah.
So in this hypothetical novel, the movie becomes a very well-known critical success, right?
Right.
Now, it is actually revealed to be this weird government psyop wherein they do not erase your memory of your life, your world. They don't erase your memory of watching the movie. What they do erase is the memory of how it was released, how people heard about it, right? They say, oh, have you heard of this movie called The End of Everything? You should go watch it. I heard of it from, I don't remember where I heard of it from, but that person who then heard it from that guy will never remember that conversation, right?
Right.
So he goes and sees the movie. Now, the whole conspiracy comes into play when you realize, oh, there's no trace of it online. You can't read about it through social media. Like, all of it's been erased. There is no, like, archive of it. People who go looking for it on the Wayback Machine all end up rounded up and unsuspiciously disappeared. Oopsie daisies. Anyways, it's just this interesting thought experiment of what if everybody watched a movie but never remembered how they heard about it. Anyways,
okay.
That is such a random tangent. But I'm going to write that book one of these days. It's going to be called The End of Everything. Keep an eye out. It's in 2052 when I will
finally write a book.
I'll write that book. I'll be busy with everything else up until that point. But let's get back to The Trial, shall we? I will admit that was kind of a related tangent. Not really, but kind of related to the contents of the trial. So you've never seen this movie?
I'm not, no.
Okay, so let me give you a quick sort of rundown of the movie. Have you heard of Psycho before?
I have.
Okay, so have you seen the movie?
I have.
Okay. So Anthony Perkins, the guy who plays Norman Bates, is the main character of the trial, okay? Mm-hmm. So he plays a character known as Joseph K. Joseph K lives in kind of this, how do I put it, brutalist architecture landscape, right? And one morning, he is awoken by these unidentified police officers who place him under arrest. But rather than taking him to prison, he's just told he is under arrest and is on trial for a crime. He is never told what his crime is. The rest of the movie, he is never told what his crime actually is. He goes to a court hearing. He goes and gets help from the advocate, who is played by Orson Welles. He goes around with his uncle to different parts of the government to figure out what his crime was, how he can get help. He meets other people who are also arrested and given a court trial, but never figures out what their crimes were. And the entire movie ends on this uncertain note of what happened to him. Well, he gets blown up with a stick of dynamite.
Okay.
But we never really know what for. Now, let me explain something a bit deeper here, Walter. The Trial is probably the best example of a stress dream movie you will ever watch. It is the best example of a stress dream I've ever seen. That's for darn sure. Does that kind of clear it up?
Yeah.
Okay. So the other thing to keep in mind is that it looks like this. It is basically super expressive, very nice black and white.
Yeah, I'm looking at pictures of it on my phone.
Yeah, it's definitely as we like to say in a pretentious sense, a commentary on bureaucracy, 100%. I will say this about the trial. The reason I'm kind of talking about it now is I wanted to bring up what the movie's about, and I wanted to kind of introduce it to you because I would recommend watching the movie. Because I actually had a really good time with it. It's basically like any high art movie you've ever seen, but with classical music randomly put into it, and then Anthony Perkins being really good as an actor. Weirdly enough, I wasn't ever bored while watching it, even though I didn't understand what was going on. I will say it banks on the star pretty hard, and he carries it through and through. But the main reason I wanted to talk about it is, interestingly enough, I think I watched the trial at kind of the perfect point in my life. I would say this would detract from it, but honestly, there's so many deeper layers to this movie that I wasn't able to uncover on just a single watch through that I think just giving you this surface level understanding of it is not going to ruin anything for you. So I'll give this to you, and this will go to the audience as well. The trial is probably trying to tell you that the way life sometimes works is that you're stuck in this weird middle ground where you meet opposition, right? You meet this obstacle and you can't proceed. You can't overcome it. Through all your efforts, you can't overcome it. But you also can't go back. You can't go back to before you ran into this obstacle. You can't really regress into being a simpler person. So sometimes you're kind of just stuck in this very strange in-between of I can't go any further, but I also can't go back. Right?
Right.
Now, keep in mind that I watched this week, and next week is finals week. Being told, hey, you're kind of stuck in infinite limbo, and you can't really go any further, but you also can't go back, is something that resonated with me pretty directly, because that's exactly how I felt the entirety of winter quarter.
Yeah.
Especially right before finals.
I kind of had a feeling like that the other night.
Yeah.
I wrote this paper. It was due. So I was finishing it up the day it was due.
Right.
It was due that day at midnight.
Right.
And as I was finishing it, I realized my data that I collected it wrong.
No.
And it was due in like 6 hours from then. So it's like, I don't have time to collect more data or to write about something new. And I can't really fix this.
No.
So I just kind of have to roll with it and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's more of an obstacle that it's.
Yeah.
I'm not. How do I put it? I feel like that's a decent enough example, but at the same time, you kind of already know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
Right. You kind of have this sense of knowing where it's going to go. Unfortunately, I mean, again, I feel bad for you. That sounds like it sucks. But interestingly enough, in the case of the trial, like, again, he's never told what his crime is, right? Mm-hmm. So I suppose take that situation, but you're essentially told by your brain that your data is wrong, but you don't know why it's wrong.
Yeah, I see that.
You spend the next 6 hours trying to figure out why is it wrong, and you never figure out why it's wrong. You just know it's wrong. You try plugging it into something, and it doesn't work with the equation. But no matter how much you look into it, you won't realize that you collected it wrong, that some of the numbers are misrepresented, right? I don't know the full context of it, but I suppose imagine that situation. And again, then never realize that the answer was you collected it wrong. You just know that the data is wrong. That's what watching the trial feels like. And it's this very surreal experience because it feels exactly how I felt during my winter quarter, but in kind of this heightened state of reality. But again, that's just my interpretation of it. And I think it's worth watching again. You know how there's all that like art house terminology of, oh, you just need to watch it again. It's a slow burn. It's complex. You need to be smarter to understand the deeper meaning of Eraserhead, guys. In my opinion, The Trial is probably the best example of an art house movie that warrants being watched again because it's not pretentious. The way I would explain it is I could subconsciously feel Orson Welles, who did write and direct the movie and played the advocate, telling the audience, me, and anybody else who was watching it, hey, you're not going to understand this. I'm going to check in on you and ask if you understand this, but you're not going to understand this. The tone of voice was very different from most, in comparison to a lot of other art film terminology, right? Mm-hmm. Normally it's like, oh, you just need to realize that it means this. The trial is more like, I think you can figure this out eventually, but I'm not so sure. It is pretty deep. I'm not going to hold your hand through it, but I will ask you eventually, are you getting this? If you're not, we're going to continue on. Right?
Right.
Do you see how my voice is? Do you see my tone of voice, how it's very different between the two examples here?
Yeah.
It kind of makes the trial seem a lot more approachable, doesn't it? It makes it seem more inviting rather than this kind of elitist idea of you're just not smart enough to understand it. It's more like you may not understand it, but it would be worth trying to. It was kind of refreshing to see. And because of that, I felt like I got more out of it than I was getting out of it originally, right? I can at least tell people I've seen an art movie that isn't really all that pretentious. It kind of warrants just having a very deeper meaning, a deeper understanding, a deeper idea. But I will admit, it's still difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say it was easy to get to my conclusion about, oh, it's about being stagnant and not being able to overcome obstacles. I only really got to that point because I'm stressed from the quarter and it's finals week. So take that with what you will. Just understand that portion of it too, right? I don't think that's the core understanding, but it's what I got on a first watch. And I will definitely rewatch it at some point, especially since I have it on Criterion. So, yeah, would recommend. Absolutely thumbs up to The Trial, in my opinion. Now that we've talked about The Trial, we are going to go into another break. And when we come back, we'll continue to talk about Orson Welles movies. One of them that's very interesting to talk about will be... Actually, no. I'll save it as kind of a spoiler. So stick around for that. Are you excited, Walter?
I'm excited.
All right. We'll be back soon. Ah, the French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. Ah, moi, the French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. This is a California champagne. 88 won the Burg here, Movie Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends, everybody. I should clarify that what I just did was what I like to call a goof. I just goofed off completely and totally live on the radio. I was parodying a well-known outtake from a champagne commercial featuring the late great, I said that out of order, whatever, the late, great Orson Welles, who we've been talking about tonight. And I thought I had to justify having that video, that clip, stuck in my mind for the last 10 years of my actual life. Okay, I can't count. It hasn't been 10 years, but it's been close to about, let's say, 6 years of my life. I have had this clip running through my brain, and I have not forgotten it since I first saw it as a 14-year-old. So, with that being said, I have just recreated the champagne commercial with Orson Welles, much to the entertainment of the guest I have on with me, if he'd like to introduce himself for our second hour.
Hi, guys. I'm Walter.
Welcome, Walter. I'm very glad you just couldn't stop laughing when I did that. I tricked you by making you think that it would be in the last break that we had, right?
Yes.
And then we go to break and you completely forgot about it. And then we come back during the second hour and I do it. Right? Did I fool you?
A little.
You've been bamboozled just a little.
Bamboozled.
Instead of bamboozle, I'm going to call it bamboozle. It doesn't deserve the second O because it was just a tiny bamboozle. Anyways, so now that I've gone on about bamboozling, let's get back on track a little bit because we have another movie by Orson Welles to talk about tonight. Normally, I, again, would talk about the other movie I talked about on Let's Watch Wednesdays, that being Touch of Evil. Now, Touch of Evil is a very good movie. Great noir movie from the day. Highly recommend checking it out. But I didn't really have a whole lot to say that I hadn't already said on What to Watch Wednesdays, right? There was stuff I had to say, and I said it on What to Watch Wednesdays. So if you're interested, then What to Watch Wednesdays, right? Mm-hmm. But I figured, in that case, might as well talk about another Orson Welles movie that I have, in fact, seen very recently. And by that, I mean I didn't watch it today. Don't look into it. Silence, please. But we are going to talk about a movie called The Other Side of the Wind from 2018, which is available to watch now on Netflix. So, Walter, let's kind of set the stage for you here. I know I told you about this already, but for our audience, how about you pretend that you haven't heard anything that I've said so far about it, okay? Mm-hmm. We're going to do that kind of thing that I was talking about in the novel earlier, where we erase all mentions of me talking about it from your mind. Ooh, what? The Other Side of the Wind? Oh, I heard about that from... Where'd I hear about that from?
Did I hear about it?
Yeah, okay, so to start from square one, Orson Welles passed away in 1985. The Other Side of the Wind released on Netflix in 2018. The Other Side of the Wind started filming in 1970. That means that The Other Side of the Wind released 48 years after it first started being made. And more importantly, it was released, let's see here. Okay. Yeah, I've done the math. It was released 33 years after the death of Orson Welles, the man who co-wrote and directed the movie.
Ouch.
Yeah. 33 years. He was in production with it for 15. So that means that he was dead longer than it was than he was alive while working when it was being worked on. That math of basically it was being worked on for a longer time when he was dead than when he was alive. That is crazy. Anyways, so that is probably the longest turnaround rate for a movie. And I wanted to have this full circle moment because you and I here on What to Watch Weekends have talked about another movie that was released recently-ish. 2018 is recently enough. By another legendary director who actually we talked about one of the movies he made earlier. For those of you who remember, at the beginning of fall quarter in 2024, we talked about Megalopolis here on What to Watch Weekends, the latest outing by the director Francis Ford Coppola, right? That movie had been in production for 47 years. Great. Very long time. The Other Side of the Wind was in development for 48 years. So now we're getting this full circle moment where we're talking about another well-known director doing his biggest movie, and one that was caught in the production cycle for many, many years. So, and also at the end of winter quarter. So again, we're getting this full circle moment. So, do you have a core question about this, Walter?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I mean, let me remind you. Okay, I'll ask the question for you.
Yeah.
I didn't like Megalopolis.
Yeah.
So I guess the question to ask is...
Do you like The Other Side of the Wind?
Yes. However, so let me start with the plot summary, actually. Now that I've gotten the kind of production cycle stuff out of the way. The basic idea of The Other Side of the Wind is it follows a film director as the main character, a man named J.J. Jake Hannaford, who on the last day of his life holds a private screening on his 70th birthday for his most recent movie. He is not aware that it will be the last day of his life, but it is. He will die in a car crash later in the movie. And by that, I mean it's never shown directly on screen, him having the car crash. At the very beginning of the movie, you are told J.J. Jake Hannaford dies in a car crash on his 70th birthday, right? Mm-hmm. So The Other Side of the Wind is essentially all of the accounts taken from members of the media, young film directors, people who are big on cinema in the early 70s, friends of J.J. Jake Hannaford, all of them going to his mansion and pulling out their Super 8 cameras to film the event of his 70th birthday party. And it cuts in between all of these accounts as Hannaford deals with the screening of all of the footage from his last movie. That being the movie within the movie being called The Other Side of the Wind, right?
Right.
So, very interesting narratively, that's for sure. Good chance to get confused. Let me tell you, I did get kind of confused, but I think I was supposed to. The first thing I want to kind of, so here, I've laid this all out for you. Do you have any questions now, Walter?
I'm kind of just skimming the plot summary.
Gotcha.
And I'm just reading, and I see it gets quite gross.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I should mention that there's, factually speaking, there's a lot of nudity in The Other Side of the Wind. Factually speaking, there is a lot of nudity. Weirdly enough, for a rated R movie, there's just a lot more X-rated stuff than swearing. There's like only 2 swear words dropped in the entirety of the movie, and it's near the end. That was crazy to me. But it makes sense considering there is a lot of X-rated stuff. And that's part of my first sort of caveat to the movie. It's definitely a very explicit movie. Most of that comes specifically from the screening that they're showing, right? Hannaford's last movie. It's the movie within the movie, which is going to get to be a real headache to try and explain to you. But The Other Side of the Wind production inside of the movie The Other Side of the Wind is the thing that has all of the explicit stuff.
Okay.
Right? The movie itself, the plot of the actual film, is again more focused on a lot of the kind of journalists kind of jumping back and forth. It's almost documentary style the way it's presented, jumping back and forth between different like 8mm, 16mm color, black and white, kind of low budget cameras to higher budget cameras. Very definitely documentary style. And it gets a bit confusing to follow at times because of that. The continuity is all over the place. But I will admit, here's the best and worst thing about The Other Side of the Wind. It is very decisive on what it wants to be. It's it's meant to be this very surreal exploration of Hollywood in the 70s with a jaded old director during the last day of his life, which very much adds to how surreal it feels. And it is also meant to be a commentary on Orson Welles and his own life. Simultaneously, it is a movie within a movie story, probably the best example of it that I can think of, even in comparison to things like Singin' in the Rain or other examples that were brought up in the movie Babylon, things like that. It's a really good exploration of the concept, interspersed with all of these documentary stuff. At the same time, I find The Other Side of the Wind to be very philosophically challenging, because it's very clear to me that the personal philosophies of Orson Welles are not ones that I personally align with sometimes. At the same time, it's presented in such a way that I can't help but listen to what he's saying. So I'm very conflicted on whether or not I want to give it props for how it's presented, or I want to kind of break down why I personally don't agree with some of this stuff. And I'm leaning towards the first option. Because let me tell you this. One of the best things about Orson Welles, any of the movies that I've seen, at some point you kind of subconsciously just kind of exist in the world of his movie. He's not the only director who does that, but he's really good at that specifically, right?
Right.
And The Other Side of the Wind is probably the first time where I can say I existed in this movie pretty significantly, while at the same time watching it all from a distance. It's very good at keeping you invested. It's very good at holding your attention. I was never bored. I was only confused, right?
Right.
It's very easy to be confused while watching this. But at the same time, there's an elegance to it, for sure. My thoughts are all over the place because let me tell you one thing that was interesting about it. I think it kind of adds to the review if I'm about as disjointed as the movie itself was. But I wanted to actually bring up something significant about this movie, right? Mm-hmm. So normally when I watch movies, especially when I'm about to review them, I will sometimes get distracted, right? Because this is the modern day. Everybody gets distracted by their phone. Social media is a thing that exists and divides our attention rapidly, right? Mm-hmm. So normally when that happens, I'll pause a movie and then I'll come back to it and just rely on the movie itself to pick itself back up and get going again. And I've judged a movie based on the basis of, can it stand on its own 2 feet after me, I get distracted. After me, I get distracted. Whatever. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
I hold a movie on to the standard of, can I jump back in and get reinvested in the story just because I paused it and came back to it? I think that's a really good test to have in our modern day and age, right?
Right.
Now, The Other Side of the Wind is one of the few movies where I started watching it, and about 15 minutes in, I got distracted, and I came back, and I thought to myself, you know what? I've been very confused for this first 15 minutes. I'm going to rewind the movie. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning because it was only 15 minutes in. So I get back to the beginning of it, and I start it all over again. The first 15 minutes of the movie suddenly started to make a lot more sense on a second time around, even in the span of like an hour, just coming back to it. And I was surprised by that because normally I don't give any movie that chance whatsoever. But I was so confused during the first 15 minutes of the movie that I was rewinding all the time. I was trying to skip around to get back to my place so that I could rewind and keep track of what was going on, making sure I was still paying attention, turning on the subtitles to make sure I was getting every piece of dialogue in my brain while I was watching it. So I was really scrambled all over the place the first time around. On the second time around, now knowing what I knew, everything kind of fit into place. None of the moments felt so confusing. I could see how it all fit together, and I was understanding what was going on significantly better. Now, of course, everything after the first 15 minutes, I didn't give the benefit of the doubt and just kind of went through it one way through, right?
All right.
Now, that made it feel a lot more confusing. But, again, let me ask you this, Walter.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched a movie back to back? As in, like, you've seen it once and then you watched it again recently after the fact?
I have not, no.
Okay. I haven't either, really. I've done it with shorts. You looked very surprised to see that.
Yeah. I'm just kind of, I don't really have anything to say.
No, that's fine.
So
that's why I'm asking you, because it's an interesting experience. But I can guarantee you this. If you were to watch The Other Side of the Wind, and you were to watch it back to back, you might actually understand it on the second time around. If anything, I am so tempted to go back home and watch it again after this because I want to understand it more. And it's really weird that I say that, right?
Right.
Because I just watched it, right? I watched it today. Why am I not understanding it the first time around? No, I'm not. But the first 15 minutes awakened something. I was like, why am I understanding this better on a second time around? It's just a very interesting experience. And it adds to how surreal it feels. The big takeaway I want you to get from this is, for it being the last Orson Welles movie, I am not surprised. Here. You even said yourself that you didn't understand Citizen Kane on your first watch through, right?
Right.
Do you think you'd understand it on a second time?
Probably.
I had the same problem, and I understood it a lot better on my second time around. That's for sure. I mean, I'm not saying you guaranteed would, but at the same time, you could see possibly understanding it better on a second time around. I think that's just kind of a style of Orson Welles.
Okay.
If you don't get it the first time around and you watch it again, you might get it again. You might get it this time. And I think that's a really important point to note is that, again, this movie was made without his involvement for half of its time it was edited, right?
Right.
He had only edited 40 minutes of the movie. I don't know what 40 minutes, but he only edited 40 minutes of it. That means the rest of it was pieced together with his notes and stuff he just jotted down. It was recreated to the best of its ability. And even then, the result was typical Orson Welles. Still a decent movie, very deep, complex, interesting, non-linear as all heck, right? Like opening up with, our main character will die. That is textbook Orson Welles. But at the same time, it being the last Orson Welles movie, the fact that it stands on its own 2 feet is weirdly comforting. And it's a much better site than Megalopolis was. That's for darn sure. I would recommend The Other Side of the Wind over Megalopolis any day of the week. I think if my opinion changes after watching it again, then this will serve as a fun time capsule from that time when I used to think that The Other Side of the Wind is worth watching. Because I do think it's worth watching. I'd recommend it to you, to our audience. In my opinion, The Other Side of the Wind is absolutely worth watching, especially if you have Netflix. Don't be lazy. In my opinion, you should not be lazy. Don't be lazy. You can watch it on Netflix. It's right there. Search it up. Give it a shot. You might like it. So,
I'm probably going to add this to my list of movies to watch eventually.
Fair enough.
I'll get to it eventually.
Yeah.
I always do.
Yeah, get to it.
You know.
I got like 300 movies on my watch list that I'll get to eventually. It's fine.
Dang, I have like 20.
Ah.
So if that.
That's better though, because that means you can actually whittle it down eventually.
Yeah.
With 300, it's very difficult to whittle that down, like nearly impossible. I think that's a better number than 300, if I'm being honest with you. So
Yeah.
you're good. Yes, I would recommend just kind of saving it in the background eventually.
All right.
I think Netflix should release it on a Blu-ray, but that's my opinion. But they should release it on Blu-ray because I don't want to watch it on Netflix again. I don't like watching Netflix, but I bet the bullet for this movie, and it was kind of worth it. So that's my final recommendation. It was worth biting the bullet and buckling down and paying for a month of Netflix to watch The Other Side of the Wind. And I should mention on Netflix there is a documentary about the making of The Other Side of the Wind that I want to watch because it'll probably give me a better understanding of the movie itself. But I think I've rambled on for quite a long time now, and now is the time to go to break.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to break. When we come back, we'll kind of close it out very briefly, talk about some things here and there. So stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, and you are?
Not Nathan.
Ah, yes. Welcome, the not doppelganger of mine. Anyways, so, welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. We have been talking kind of here and there about Orson Welles, the interesting side of one of the most legendary directors of all time, who was also a writer, and he co-wrote things like Citizen Kane, and he wrote things like The Trial, co-wrote The Other Side of the Wind, and he also acted. But to close out the show and to close out Winter Quarter, I thought it'd be an interesting idea to talk about one facet of Orson Welles that enough people know about, but I think it's worth talking about, especially since this is a radio show, right? We're currently on the radio right now. If anybody's listening to us in your car, hi. I don't know.
We live in your car. Ooh.
Whoa! Imagine just opening the glove compartment or just someone like ripping out the front screen and it's just actually us sitting here in the station. That'd be really funny, actually. I want to make that. Anyways, so because this is a radio show, one of the most infamous things about Orson Welles is that he was a radio host. And as a matter of fact, a very early example of a radio host. One of his most well-known broadcasts was his reading of a sort of adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the story of War of the Worlds, it's a very simple story by H.G. Wells in which aliens come to Earth, specifically Martians, I believe.
Yes.
And take over the world. And then die to oxygen in the air because they have weak lungs and God is real. I think that's the plot.
Something like that.
Yep. So, I know certain things about this. I've been told kind of the general idea, but Walter, you seem to know a little bit more about it. So I'll let you take the floor.
So one specific thing I was talking about earlier about this was... It was first broadcasted in 1930 something? I think 1938.
Here, let me check the one that I found on YouTube specifically, because that will give me a good idea of Orson Welles War of the Worlds radio broadcast 1938.
Okay, I guessed correctly.
Oh, nice.
Anyways, it was right around the time that more people started to own radios in their homes, and it became more and more of a common thing. And it came out at just the right time where people out of context tuned into it and listened to this, thinking it was an actual news broadcast of a Martian invasion and they should seek shelter and prepare to fight Martians.
Right. It should be mentioned that this was also broadcast on October 30th.
Yes.
So, like, the day before Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
So, it makes it all the funnier that people didn't really understand that it was just an elaborate... It was just a story, and if anything, it was intentionally kind of a hoax.
Yes.
To scare people. But people didn't get the memo, and a lot of people panicked.
Yeah.
From what I've heard. There was...
And this can tie into Washington State history a little bit.
Oh, really?
Because I was just skimming an article about it to make sure my facts were right.
Oh, sure.
But on the day, in the city of Concrete, which is a bit north of here.
I keep forgetting that we have a city called Concrete.
In the city of Concrete, it was during a big storm, during a power outage, during this awful storm.
Right.
The day before Halloween, people lost power. So
Right.
it's 1938. People tune into their radio to get information on, when's the power going to come back? When's the storm going to go away? Instead, they tune into their radio. Hey, Martians are invading. Seek shelter. And that made them panic. And so there was, after this happened, people freaked out.
Right.
After this happened, a news article was published in the Skagit Tribune saying, haha, these guys got trolled. Let's point and laugh at them.
That's kind of mean. But
Well, it wasn't like that, but it was basically like, oh yeah, these people actually believed Martians were invading
right.
during this.
Yeah.
Because the city of Concrete is still pretty far out and
Right.
pretty removed from any other major city.
Right, especially, and if they're encountering power problems, then it would
Yeah.
make sense. Especially considering it's War of the Worlds, like that one does have kind of global spanning effects. So if they were having any problems with it, it would make sense.
Yeah.
I should mention that I did listen to the full broadcast. Have you listened to the full thing before?
I have not. no.
Okay. So I listened to it on my way here. And I'll be honest, I was approaching it from the perspective of, does it sound realistic? And does it sound kind of scary? Right? Kind of twofold. Mm-hmm. I'll admit that there were some parts that didn't sound super realistic. But there were other parts that definitely had this air, this chill, this kind of surreal twinge of feeling very real, kind of accurate. This sort of feeling like, oh, I could see people confusing this for a real news thing. I think it wasn't few and far between, but I think, let's just say like 20 minutes into the broadcast to 40 minutes is kind of the sweet spot where people had to tune in to get those bits and pieces that would have confused them into thinking it was a real news announcement of there are Martians attacking, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of preamble. There's a lot of kind of introduction to it beforehand. And some of it sounds very out there. And I couldn't really see it being misconstrued in the beginning, because it's like, here's this rural town and I don't remember what state it was in, but it's like, okay, if this is more national, then why would people think, oh, there's like solar flashes coming from Mars? Why would that be on national radio, right? People would be logical enough to not really think about it being real or not.
Yeah.
At least that's what I think. If they weren't, then I have a misplaced faith in humanity. That's great to think about. But regardless of that, I will give it credit that let's say 15 minutes to like the 40-minute mark are definitely very entertaining and engaging because of how real they sound. There are some flubs here and there, but I was comparing it pretty interestingly. You might understand this, actually. Have you heard, this sounds so unrelated, and it's going to sound like kind of a out of left field moment, but my benchmark for what does actual horror in a person's voice sound like is the original reaction by a news reporter to the crashing of the Hindenburg.
Okay.
That's where the phrase, oh, the humanity comes from,
Yeah.
right? I've seen that broadcast before. It was a news guy, and he watched it, and if you've ever seen it, it's basically someone watching the Hindenburg go down, and then him basically crying his eyes out and going, "Oh, that's so horrible. That's awful. Look at them all dying. Oh, the humanity." And yeah, as somber as that sounds, it was very genuine sounding, right? Because it was genuine horror, genuine sadness. So I used that as kind of my benchmark to see whether or not the War of the Worlds broadcast could be interpreted as very genuine sounding. And there were definitely some parts that felt like that, especially when they're fighting and losing to the aliens in that initial kind of invasion. When the army's called in, when they're firing against them, when they're being attacked, when there's a lot of people dead in the fields. In the course of the story, there's like only 170 people left out of this like 7,000 group of people. It's got this very surreal atmosphere, this very uncanny feeling of I can picture this in my head happening right now. And then Orson Welles comes on and is this physicist who talks about wandering the apocalyptic wasteland, and it kind of loses its ability to be believable as an actual news broadcast. But it is also a story first, right?
Right.
They did obviously kind of intend to mess with people a little bit and make them think it was real. But at the same time, it is also an adaptation of a very well-known story. And it's a story first.
Yeah.
Right? So it made sense that it was a lot more story-focused near the end.
Right.
And it was still interesting because Orson Welles has a really good radio voice. He's got a really good voice in general. I love Orson Welles' voice. And if I was ever able to do it, I would absolutely love that. Unfortunately, the only thing I'm able to replicate from Orson Welles is him going, "Mwah, the French." I think that's the best way to close it out. Yeah, do you have anything else you want to add?
I do not.
Okay, well, that doesn't mean I don't appreciate you being on with me tonight, Walter. It's been great having you on this quarter.
Yeah.
Massive thank you to everybody else who's been on with me this quarter. This has been a really fun quarter for What to Watch Weekends because sometimes it hasn't happened because of classes or being sick. So next quarter, I'll try to maintain it a little bit better. I promise I will try. I can't promise I will. I will promise I will try, though. You can hold me to the word that I'm trying. And that's all you can ask from me. But since you can ask something from me, I can ask something from you. That being, if you are interested in following along with anything else related to What to Watch Wednesdays or What to Watch Weekends, check out the Instagram page or the YouTube page at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces. Be sure to check those two out. And I don't know exactly what date it'll be coming back, but you might want to check the Instagram to see when the next episode of What to Watch Wednesdays and What to Watch Weekends will be happening. It'll be sometime in the spring quarter, but I don't know exactly because I would rather just plan for the immediate future of spring break, which begins next week for me. For those of you where it will also be beginning next week, including you, Walter, because it's finals week. Good luck on finals. Hope you all get home safely. Have a good spring break. Excuse me indeed. And we'll be back next quarter at the very least. So with that being said, my name is Nathan once again. And do you want?
Yeah, my name is Walter.
All right. And we wish you all a good night. Good night and good luck. Bye-bye, everybody.